under the ring for random weapons, replaced with the straightforward weapon wheel, allowing you to curate your own theatre of disaster. You could also set some weapons on fire, which honestly seems a bit much. Superstars now had 2 different wrestling types, meaning each character could be played in a variety of ways. While this was good on paper, it massively restricted what you could and couldn't do. Take the case of Chavo Guerrero. Because he wasn't listed as a high flyer in-game, he couldn't do springboard moves, etc., even though the former WCW Cruiserweight Champion did them in real life all the time, even at the shops. What was meant to open gameplay up inadvertently restricted it and made the game far less of a fun experience than other SmackDown games before it. Luckily, SVR 2008 was saved by the 24/7 mode, which merged GM mode and season mode into one big ball of action. However, this would be the last game to feature a GM mode at all. Boo! Number 15. WWE 2K19. PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. 2018. Hindsight is a beautiful thing, isn't it? Whether realizing too late that the final donut was probably not a good idea, or the fact that WWE 2K19 was in fact a very good game indeed, as 2K20 taunts you with its horrific, unfinished face. It seems almost strange now that 2K19 was met with mixed reviews from players and reviewers alike upon release, but is now widely heralded as one of the best of the 2K series. Moving away from the simulation style that had dominated earlier titles in the series, 2K19 was a more intuitive and flowing affair, but still retained a great level of depth and realism, and whatever the hell Big Head mode was. My Career mode was fleshed out, taking you from the Indies to WrestleMania, and Showcase mode returned, featuring everyone's favourite bearded scamp, Daniel Bryan. It's obviously Daniel Bryan. 2K19 still had its fair share of bugs and glitches, and the commentary track was still mainly naff, but it remained a very well-rounded wrestling game, and thanks to the absolute dumpster fire that was 2K20, its reputation will only grow. Hell, WWE themselves still advertise it on TV rather than promote 2K20. Oh dear. With the WWE 2K series' future up in the air, if 2K19 serves as the series' swan song, then it is certainly a fine way to bow out. Number 14. WWF Smackdown. PlayStation 2000. Ah, Smackdown. Little did we know back in the year 2000 that PlayStation's latest WWE grappler would completely change the game. Although PS1 owners hoping for something in the vein of THQ's N64 wrestling games may have been a little disheartened at first, SmackDown proved to be a fun, self-contained WWE game with endless replayability and sold a boatload of copies. The roster showcased the best of the Attitude Era, and the Creation Suite was more in-depth than any other WWE game that had preceded it. The in-ring action was frenetic and very, very fun, with the ability to hit your finisher at any point, causing many fights with friends and siblings alike. And for the first time in a WWE game, there was an expansive backstage area to fight in. But SmackDown was very rough around the edges, which is understandable as both the first in a series and the first WWE game made by the partnership of THQ and Ukes. The entrances were a little strange, but did boast better AV qualities than any other WWE game, and some of the presentation was a bit sloppy, but it didn't affect the game all that much. Luckily, the engine that ran the whole thing was solid, and while subsequent SmackDown titles were miles better, the debut title still packs a wallop.
Number 13. WWE Smackdown vs. Raw 2007. PlayStation 2, Xbox 360 and PSP 2006. Finally, THQ learned their lesson, and after years of the SmackDown games being PlayStation exclusives, SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 reared its head on the Xbox 360, finally giving Xbox owners a WWE game they could be proud of. Following on from previous SVR games, 2007 was a substantial and immersive affair, but with some stark changes, the biggest of which was a switch from a traditional button grappling system to an analog stick system. The change divided fan opinion, but purists could revert to the classic controls if they wanted to. Regardless of what controls you chose though, the gameplay was still fantastic, with a balanced and expansive roster to choose from. Alongside the aforementioned new grappling system were tweaked grappling options, including ultimate control moves and arena hotspots, a tiny bit like the OMG moments of 2K, but nowhere near as exciting or cool. Then there was SVR 2007's big selling point: we could fight in the crowd! Sort of. Yes, THQ promised a big, massive, expansive, immersive, in-crowd fighting experience, but in reality we got a small clearing with a few weapons and a climbable platform. Still pretty good, but nothing like what we were hoping for. Number 12, WWE All-Stars, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PSP, Nintendo Wii, Nintendo 3DS, and Xbox 360, 2011. All-Stars is a surprising game. One look at the chunky, over-the-top art on the front cover, and you're likely to tut and whine, "This is an abomination, I want realism and rest holds, not this childish nonsense, thank you very much." But that's a stupid thing to say. Stop saying it. All-Stars took us back to the arcade WWE games of old, and injected some much needed fun and colour into a game series that had gotten a little stale and grey. Featuring a roster of contemporary WWE superstars and legends of the industry, All-Stars took a what-if approach to storytelling, allowing unique and interesting dream matches to come to life. Leaving all logic by the door, All-Stars was a daft beat-em-up, throwing out the more realistic simulation-like experience of the Smackdown vs. Raw games, and instead reveling in its own weirdness. The game evoked memories of sitting in your undies playing with wrestling action figures as a small child, or a grown adult, as is the case here, with the action being over-the-top, unrealistic, but so much fun that you'll start to question why you ever bothered growing up in the first place. Luckily, we may be getting an experience like All-Stars with the upcoming WWE Battlegrounds, and if it's even half as silly as All-Stars, it'll still be very fun indeed. Number 11, WWE Day of Reckoning 2, Nintendo GameCube, 2005. Day of Reckoning 2 was everything a good sequel should be, i.e. the first one but with bells on, basically. Realising they had a formula that worked, THQ and Yuke's did very little to Day of Reckoning's mechanics, instead choosing to just load it up with more features than you could shake a kendo stick at. The story mode was expanded, picking up where Day of Reckoning 1 left off, and saw you feud with the omnipresent Triple H. At times, the difficulty curve in story mode was ridiculous, but it still made for a rewarding experience. 2 new gameplay features were added in the form of stamina and a revamped submission mode, but the stamina meter in particular stuck out like a sore thumb, adding an unexpected realistic element to an otherwise fairly arcadey game. But the submission minigame was at least a fun and welcome little feature. Additionally, Day of Reckoning 2 had better graphics, improved enemy AI, and a roster of over 40 WWE superstars, as well as the usual game types like TLC and Hell in a Cell. It also retained the basic but easy to use logo designer, meaning you could put a drawing of a lovely cat on your creator wrestler's jumper, or a Naughty Wilson if you made a baddie. What's the word? A heel? Number 10, WWE Smackdown vs. Raw, 2010. PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PSP, Nintendo DS, Nintendo Wii, and Xbox 360, 2009. As with most of the annual WWE games, the smallest of changes can make or break a title and can radically alter their legacy. Case in point, remember the stick grappling system of SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 we spoke about merely moments ago? Well, it was unceremoniously binned off for the 2010 edition, with THQ returning to the traditional button approach, and there was much rejoicing. The HUD was also dramatically scaled back, giving the game a very clean and fresh look. Realising that SVR 2009 was as underwhelming as a birthday card with a 10p piece in it, SmackDown vs. Raw 2010 apologised to fans of the series by including an absolute bumload of creation tools, making it one of, if not the, most customisable WWE game ever made. There was a story designer mode with support for keyboards if you wanted to recreate the works of Shakespeare with Batista, while creator wrestler and creator finisher modes were vastly retooled. The online community creation suite was also established, meaning you wouldn't have to put up with rubbish creator wrestlers, unless you really wanted to, of course. The gameplay engine was starting to show its age, but look, we were so distracted by all the shiny new features that we didn't really notice it at the time. And hey, when it comes to wrestling, isn't that what really matters? Number 9, WWE 13, PlayStation 3, Nintendo Wii, and Xbox 360, 2012. WWE 13 is a curious beast. The last WWE game made by THQ prior to their bankruptcy, later editions of the game bear the 2K logo despite them having no involvement. Regardless, the game was really good, and it felt like the series was turning a corner. CM Punk as the cover star, an updated and retooled engine, a return of the special referee mode. We were all rubbing our hands with glee when WWE 13 was announced. Easily the highlight of WWE 13 though was the Attitude Era mode, giving new and old fans alike the chance to play through the most notorious and highly regarded era in WWE history. Mixing actual footage with famous moments recreated in-game, Attitude Era mode was one of the best features in years, and served as the precursor to Showcase mode. In order to support Attitude Era mode, as well as faithfully representing the modern WWE superstars, WWE 13 had a chunky roster of over 80 playable characters, and when you add in the usual Creator Wrestler download suite, the possibilities were pretty much endless. The commentary was still absolute plops, but never mind. Number 8. WWE Smackdown vs. Raw, PlayStation 2, 2004. The first major rebrand of the SmackDown series, SmackDown vs. Raw wasn't actually the first game to feature the WWE brand split. That honour goes to Shut Your Mouth. Ha! Knowledge. Following on from the classic Here Comes the Pain, SmackDown vs. Raw retained many of the features that made the former game so great, while adding a few new tricks to its repertoire. The most notable was the clean/dirty system, which focused your character's tactics, providing you with new moves and options depending on how you played the game. The pre-match minigames were another fun little addition, but didn't exactly shake the earth. SmackDown vs. Raw was the first in the series to include an online mode though. Although it was an extremely basic affair, it was still something the series had been crying out for. It also finally featured the voices of the wrestlers themselves in season mode, giving an extra dimension to the fan favourite feature. One of the major reasons for SmackDown vs. Raw to not be higher on this list though, is its roster. No Brock Lesnar, no Goldberg, no Steve Austin. We did get a handful of legends, which is something, but come on, I want to play as the guy who I literally share a surname with, please. Number 7. WWE Smackdown Shut Your Mouth, PlayStation 2, 2002. SmackDown's fourth outing, Shut Your Mouth, sorry, that's the title of the game, not a threat, started to take its first baby steps away from the pick-up-and-play outings that had preceded it. Okay, so not entirely, as the gameplay was still easy to jump into, and there were tons of death-defying things you could do in-game, like jumping off the Titantron or fighting in a train station. But with the vast expansion of season mode and roster trades, Shut Your Mouth was starting to reshape SmackDown into more of a sports sim. Shut Your Mouth was a WWE game worthy of the PS2, following the relative disappointment of Just Bring It. But more importantly, Shut Your Mouth finally gave us the proper actual Hell in a Cell to play with. No more weird regular cage with a roof, we had the full shebang, complete with breakaway panels and blood and crying. The roster was expansive, the amount of stages on offer was fantastic, and the gameplay was frenetic and fun, especially when playing TLC matches. And if you wanted to, you could play a special guest referee match with 2 referees for some reason, probably just to make sure everything was fair and everyone was having fun. Yeah, that'll be it. Number 6, WWE 2K14, PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, 2013. Following on from the well-received WWE 13, 2K14 was the first WWE game made under 2K Sports watchful eye. Luckily, longtime developer Ukes were still on board, meaning that any tweaks were going to be effective, and not just a case of throwing wrestlers at the wall and hoping they stuck. Said tweaks improved everything from chain wrestling to animations, and even improved running attacks to limit the amount they could be spammed against a dazed opponent. Showcase mode returned in 2 guises. The 30 Years of WrestleMania mode saw you, well, play through 30 years of WrestleMania, and the streak saw you either defending The Undertaker's legendary WrestleMania streak or attempting to break it, which was easier said than done. Seriously, the difficulty spike when trying to take on the dead man was absolutely ridiculous. As you'd expect, the presentation and feel of the game were spot on, and no, I'm not mentioning the commentary again, you can't make me. Other WWE 2K games did bits and bobs better than 2K14 did, and it'd be another year before the series took the full leap into into a much prettier engine, but as a complete package, WWE 2K14 stands tall above its siblings. Number 5. WWF Smackdown 2 Know Your Role, PlayStation 2000. The leap from SmackDown to SmackDown 2 Know Your Role was massive. Knowing that the first game had done well, THQ and Yuke's sought to hone and improve SmackDown's engine as much as possible for its sequel. But like its predecessor, Know Your Role was still quite rough in places. The ladder match in particular was a sloppy affair, as it was very possible to win in about 5 seconds, such was the apparent lack of a minigame. But sod it was still fun. The Hell in a Cell was strange too, as it was not really a Hell in a Cell. I mean, it wasn't even a kennel from hell. But you know what? It was the first time the match had been replicated in any video game, so at the time, we just accepted it gleefully with our mouths agape the first time we climbed onto the cell roof. For you younger viewers whose earliest exposure to WWE games was in the SVR or 2K series, you may not get the hype, but the Attitude Era games were genuinely big and exciting events. Even non-wrestling fans, like me, played the first couple of SmackDown games because they were that damn good. In fact, these games may even be responsible for getting a chunk of the modern fanbase interested in WWE in the first place. Number 4. WWE Smackdown vs. Raw 2006, PlayStation 2 2005. SmackDown vs. Raw 2006 came at a turning point for the WWE. The old guard of the Attitude Era were mainly gone, and the company was resting on the broad, invisible shoulders of John Cena and Batista. The SmackDown series also shifted too, moving further away than ever before from the arcade style that dominated wrestling games for the best part of 20 years. SVR06 then introduced a number of new gameplay modes, from Buried Alive matches and Fulfill Your Fantasy matches, don't ask, to Create an Entrance mode and the legendary General Manager mode. We could also, for the first time, challenge for titles in exhibition matches, a feature which previously had only been available in season mode. While you may scoff and say, you were excited about that? The answer is yes. Yes, we were. It made the game a more personal affair, and now when pitting your creator wrestler against your mates, the stakes were much greater. SmackDown vs. Raw 2006 still holds up incredibly well nearly 15 years later. And if you're still at a loss with the collapse of 2K20, then you could do far worse than dusting off your old PS2 and firing up SVR06. Number 3. WWF WrestleMania 2000, Nintendo 64, 1999. Here we go, Grapple fans, it's some N64 content to keep you happy. WrestleMania 2000 was when everything changed. THQ jumped ship from WCW to WWE and gave us the third installment in their classic grappler series, if you don't include the Japanese Virtual Pro Wrestling series, which was also incredibly good, to be fair. The gameplay was intuitive and easy to jump into. The character models, although on the chunky side, had a lot of character to them, and the ability to completely alter any established wrestler's appearance made for some interesting rosters. Talking of which, the two main drawbacks of Mania 2000 concern the roster, as well as the difficulty. The roster itself was a bit rubbish, as outside of the usual suspects like Stone Cold, Triple H and The Rock, you had a motley crew of mediocrity, with the likes of The Blue Meanie, Mideon, and Meat, and unfortunately we're not talking about the wonderful Mortal Kombat character. Additionally, the difficulty spike, especially when playing Road to WrestleMania mode, was ridiculous, and with a very vague reversal system on hand, you had to scrape and claw your way to victory. Those caveats aside though, WrestleMania 2000 and its sequel, and more on that in a minute, are still played religiously around the world, with many wrestling fans unable to look beyond these games in favour of anything else. And who are we to disagree? Number 2. WWE Smackdown Here Comes the Pain, PlayStation 2 2003. Much like with the previous entry, and maybe the next one, there are a number of gamers who will never be able to look beyond Here Comes the Pain. The definitive SmackDown game is Ben's personal favourite of all time, featuring one of the greatest rosters in WWE gaming history, and a whole host of extra modes to keep the experience fresh. Whether squaring up to bad lads like Brock Lesnar and Goldberg, or electing to slap Eric Bischoff around, Here Comes the Pain was an extremely well-rounded WWE WWE video game adaptation. The camera and graphics had been improved from earlier entries in the series, and the attribute system made each character feel and play distinctly differently from one another. You could also see how damaged individual parts of your opponent's body were, letting you tactically target the leg if you wanted to win the match with a sharpshooter, or repeatedly hit your opponent in the face if you were a nasty and naughty boy. The true joy of HCTP was that you could play it however you liked, whether you wanted a straight-laced technical grappling experience, or if you wanted to jump off a helicopter onto the pavement below, you could do it. It embraced the good, the bad, and the weird of WWE, and threw it all into the mix. And if you say you ever got bored of playing this game, then you, sir, are a boring bloody liar.
Number 1. WWF No Mercy. Nintendo 64, 2000. 20 years have passed since No Mercy was released, and it is still, to this day, the benchmark for professional wrestling games. I know it, you know it, and even the wrestlers themselves know it. When Midway released TNA Impact, part of the hype came from the devs claiming it was based on No Mercy, and with AEW having a game in the works, Cody Rhodes has already teased links to No Mercy before any details have been made public.
But what made it so good? Well, for a start, the engine built for the N64 games was absolutely spot on, and with each passing release, it just got better and better. No Mercy was its peak, improving on the ho-hum roster of WrestleMania 2000 and adding in features such as breakable tables, ladder matches, backstage brawls, and an in-depth season mode, alongside a revamped Creator Wrestler mode, and little gameplay tweaks such as the inclusion of running grapples. Plus, weapons wouldn't disappear when you drop them, so that was nice too. Yes, season mode was ridiculously hard, especially the handicap match against the APA, and the fact that some cartridges featured a bug that wiped the game completely was basically unacceptable.
But the game itself more than makes up for it, and if you had one of the many perfect cartridges, then you had very little to complain about. To this day, No Mercy still boasts a huge following, from the traditional fans of the cartridge to a massive online modding community, and it just won't die. So here's to you, No Mercy, the greatest WWE game ever made, but we sincerely hope that one day you will be toppled. Please. We've suffered enough these last 15 years watching THQ and 2K try.
And there we go, that was every WWE video game ranked from worst to best. But do you agree with our rankings? If so, then fantastic, a WWE title shot awaits you in your future. If not, we'll look forward to engaging you in a no disqualification scrap in the comments about the merits of Crush Hour.
Also, if you have suggestions for other Every X ranked from worst to best videos, let us know. If we like your idea, we will add it to a very long list of other ideas we also like.
You can follow Triple Jump on Twitter here, and while you're at it, why not support the things you enjoy by having a look at our Patreon.
Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'm Ben.
And I'm Peter from Triple Jump, and thanks for watching.
In March of 2000, pro wrestling was everywhere. Sports entertainment was at its absolute peak. ECW had landed a TV deal with TNN, WCW was giving the world title to a new guy every few days, and the WWF was pushing the boundaries every night with more blood and boobs than any preteen knew what to do with. It was a great time to be a fan, and it was a great time to be a kid. When I wasn't stuck at school, my days consisted of goofing off outside with my friends. We'd play kickball, run around with toy guns, play with our action figures, or guys as we'd call them, and play video games. Video games were becoming more mature as the years went on. Mario and Crash Bandicoot weren't going anywhere, but they were being joined by the likes of Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Metal Gear Solid.
Payday, Mitch. I'm proud of you. With this, you joined the American workforce. A rare breed of determined and dedicated...
Quit. Now $129.95 gets you an N64 and a second atomic purple color controller free.
If you were a wrestling fan with a Nintendo 64, you had it made. WCW was absolutely killing it in the 90s with WCW NWO World Tour, and then WCW vs. NWO Revenge. The WWF followed suit, releasing WrestleMania 2000 just 2 years later. But if you had a PlayStation, you weren't so lucky. I was a PlayStation kid growing up, which means I basically got the shit end of the stick. While the other kids played their 4-player copies of Revenge and WrestleMania 2000, I was trying my best to pretend that WWF Warzone wasn't a complete pile of shit. Warzone was developed by Iguana, who had been making WWF games for years, and none of them were particularly amazing. I remember telling my friends, "No, dude, Warzone is awesome. If you do a weapons match, sometimes there's a table." That was my argument, that every once in a while there'd be a table you could break. Yeah, what a great game.
1, 2, 3.
But back to March of 2000. March 2nd, 2000 to be exact.